Okay, picture this. You run a massively successful business. You're operating not just in your home country, but halfway across the world. You make a great profit, and then, boom, you get hit with a massive tax bill from the country you're operating in. And just when you think you're clear, you get hit with another, identical tax bill from your home country. It's the ultimate economic friction, and frankly, it's enough to paralyze global trade entirely. So how on earth do two massive global powerhouses like Singapore and the United Arab Emirates trade billions of dollars every single year without falling into this trap? Well, they've built a completely ingenious, highly structured solution, and we're going to break the whole thing down today.
Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this today. We are going to actually dissect the legal documents that make the Singapore-UAE economic corridor so incredibly seamless. Now, if you're sitting there thinking international tax law is just dry, dusty paperwork, I promise you, by the end of this explainer, you're going to see it for what it really is, a brilliant interlocking puzzle. And the really fascinating part, the big takeaway here, is how two entirely separate legal documents, literally two distinct PDFs, actually work perfectly in tandem as complementary pieces to build a massive economic bridge. So here is our roadmap for today. First, the double tax dilemma. Next, clearing the skies. Then we'll look at broadening the economic bridge, dive into the complementary connection, and finally wrap up with modernizing the agreements. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the double tax dilemma. To really set the stage here, we have to understand the absolute nightmare scenario for an international business, and that is double taxation. It is exactly what it sounds like, paying tax on the exact same income or profits in two different jurisdictions. Without a legal framework to prevent this, a company based in Singapore that's doing business in Dubai could easily have its profit margins completely wiped out. It stifles investment, it halts expansion, and it just keeps capital locked up within domestic borders. But building the bridge between Singapore and the UAE to solve this, it wasn't an overnight project. It was a decades-long evolution. As you can see, the Air Transport Agreement actually had an effective date going all the way back to 1971, though it was officially signed in 1989. Then we get the broader Double Taxation Agreement, or DTA, signed in 1995, followed by some absolutely crucial modernizations in 2014 and 2019. This evolution beautifully shows that managing a multi-billion-dollar trade corridor isn't a set-it-and-forget-it deal. It requires constant care, feeding, and legal upgrading. Which brings us to Section 2, clearing the skies. Before they tackled the entire economy, Singapore and the UAE had to deal with the highly specific industry that physically links their two nations together, aviation. Both are massive global aviation hubs, right? They're home to mega carriers like Singapore Airlines, Emirates, and Gulf Air. And this brings us to the first of our two critical documents, the 1989 Air Transport Agreement. This was a targeted carve-out specifically designed to protect these vital international airlines. It established a concept called reciprocal exemption. Put simply, Singapore agreed not to tax the UAE's airlines on their flight operations, and the UAE agreed not to tax Singapore's airlines. But the devil, and honestly, the genius, is in the details here. This treaty is incredibly granular. It doesn't just exempt the profit from selling a plane ticket. It exempts the spare parts. It ensures that the salaries of the flight crew aren't double taxed when they land in the other country. The 1989 protocol even explicitly exempts things like crockeries, uniforms, and X-ray machines from customs duty. This guarantees that every single aspect of running an international airline is entirely protected from host country taxation. Moving right along to Section 3, broadening the economic bridge. Okay, so the skies were officially cleared, but what about everything else? What about manufacturing, shipping, financial services, intellectual property? Well, in 1995, the two nations signed the second of our complementary PDFs, the much broader Double Taxation Agreement. Now, the ultimate test for whether a foreign business gets taxed under this specific agreement revolves around a bit of legal jargon we need to bust right now: permanent establishment, or PE. According to Article 5 of the 1995 DTA, a PE is a fixed place of business, like a branch, an office, or a factory. The rule is simple but super powerful. An enterprise of one country is only taxable in the other country if it actually has a permanent establishment there, and even then, they are only taxed on the profits strictly attributable to that specific establishment. It draws a very, very clear line in the sand for businesses. And the 1995 DTA didn't stop there. It aggressively capped tax rates to stimulate investment, 5%. That's the cap the 1995 agreement put on gross dividends. It also capped the tax on royalties, so payments for copyrights, patents, or trade secrets at 5%. This is just a massive win for businesses. It ensures that parent companies can repatriate their profits and intellectual property earnings without taking a huge haircut. Right alongside that, we have 7%. This is the absolute maximum tax rate that can be charged on interest. By capping the tax on interest at 7%, this broader DTA heavily encourages cross-border lending and financial investment. It literally makes it cheaper and way more efficient for banks and businesses in Singapore to lend money to the UAE and vice versa. All right, now for the really cool part. Section 4, the complementary connection.
So remember how I said we're looking at two different PDFs here? We have the 1989 Airline Treaty and the massive 1995 DTA. How do these two legal documents actually coexist out in the real world? Do they compete? Did the newer one cancel out the older one? Actually, they are a total masterclass in complementary legal design. They do not compete at all, they complement each other. The 1989 Air Treaty has a highly narrow scope. Think of it as a surgical tool, focusing strictly on aircraft, airline crews, and, the crockeries we talked about. The 1995 DTA, on the other hand, is the broad umbrella. It covers shipping, dividends, royalties, personal services, the whole shebang of general business. The creators specifically engineered them so that these two PDFs are essentially part 1 and part 2 of one comprehensive strategy.
And to make sure there was absolutely no legal confusion whatsoever, the drafters included this fantastic clause in the 1995 protocol. It explicitly states that the 1989 airline agreement shall have full force and effect despite the new, broader agreement being signed. I mean, this is just a brilliant piece of legal cross-referencing. It proves that the new, broader treaty was purposefully designed to respect and maintain the highly specialized older airline agreement. The specific protections for airlines weren't accidentally overwritten, they were permanently preserved under the protection of the broader economic umbrella. Let's ground all these abstract legal principles in reality for a second. Here are the actual people who constructed this complementary bridge back in 1995. Dr. Richard Hu, the Minister for Finance for Singapore, and Ahmed Hamed Al Tayer, the Minister of State for Finance and Industry for the UAE. Their signatures finalized an interlocking legal framework that allows two completely distinct PDFs signed years apart to harmoniously govern billions of dollars in modern trade. And finally, Section 5, modernizing the agreements. Because, of course, the global economy never stands still. What worked perfectly in 1995 needed a serious upgrade for the fast-paced, highly digitized 21st century. The 2014 protocol significantly modernized the rules on the ground. For instance, the time a construction site can exist before it's considered a permanent establishment was raised from 9 months to 12 months, which gives construction firms a lot more breathing room. The threshold for service provision was expanded to 300 days, but perhaps the most massive change? The tax rules for dividends and interest were completely revamped. Instead of those 5 and 7% caps we discussed earlier, the 2014 protocol made dividends and interest taxable only in the recipient state. It just totally streamlined the flow of capital.
And then we have the 2019 MLI enhancements. MLI stands for Multilateral Instrument. Think of this as the modern shield of international tax law. Its entire goal is to prevent base erosion and profit shifting, which is really just a fancy way of saying it stops bad actors from using these beautiful, complementary treaties as tax evasion loopholes. It introduces a principal purpose test. If a company sets up an arrangement where the main purpose is just to dodge taxes using this treaty, they are completely blocked from the benefits. It ensures this incredible economic corridor is used for legitimate, real-world trade.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? We've seen how a highly specific aviation agreement from 1989 and a broad economic umbrella from 1995, two totally different documents, were designed to work perfectly as complementary pieces to prevent double taxation. And we've seen how they've been continually updated to stop modern tax evasion. But as we close out today, I want to leave you with this final thought. As the world shifts toward borderless digital services and AI-driven commerce, how will these historic, interlocking puzzle pieces adopt next? It's a pretty fascinating question for the future of international trade. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.